Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Created in the Image of God, exploring the role of religion in society with our host, Wade Fransson. Wade is the founder of Something or Other Publishing, a groundbreaking publishing and marketing platform with multiple imprints, including Royal Falcon Press, which focuses on religion, spirituality, and humanitarian topics. Wade has been a student of the Bible for nearly 4 decades and continues to study it to this day. And here with us again is Daniel Sanderson, the founder and CEO of Planksip, an online blogging platform that promotes and propagates thought concepts and intellectual property for nonfiction authors and academics. Hello, gentlemen, and welcome back.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate that intro, and welcome back, Daniel.
Okay.
Very excited to see you again, as always. I really love this time each week where we can dig into topics that have merit, substance, and stimulate the intellect. And as always, for the audience who I hope is right now clicking like and subscribing, what we're trying to do is find common ground, show that those who have a religious perspective can be reasonable, can make a valid contribution to a society that increasingly, it seems, in America, for example, seem to want to push religion out of public discourse and relegate it to a sideline, very private discussion for those who have not yet become enlightened and who have not yet joined the modern era. I overstate somewhat for effect. I exaggerate somewhat to make the point. But it's my view that religion continues to inform, to inspire the intellectual process, and therefore makes a more than valid contribution to the questions that are facing modern society. And Daniel, I'm so pleased to have you here. Your perspective is, you're coming at it from a different angle than mine, but perhaps you can share your thoughts on how you and what you do with Planksip is making a contribution to society in the way that I just described, my work and emphasis on religion and the spiritual.
Oh, and a focus on Planksip as opposed to the article or the topic of tonight, I suppose.
Well, we'll get there. I'm just sort of establishing these two different perspectives, and which have a lot of overlap and commonality. I'm not remotely trying to create a false dichotomy here, but rather just show different facets of the discussion.
Well, I think, from the title of the show, it's the role of religion in a modern society, and I think that's kind of the key. The asterisk is in a modern society. I would consider myself spiritual, but I don't belong to a club. I thought of a different way to try and say, maybe Wade and I are a lot closer than we tend to, paint a picture for the audience. And in fact, there's quite a bit of overlapping concentric circles or places of agreement, and that's not just from a logical standpoint. That's also from a heartfelt standpoint, right? I guess how can I relate that back to Planksip? Well, I guess I try not to make it denominational. I try and think bigger than that. And I thought to myself just before I jumped on tonight's call, I thought, well, is there not a fundamental premise with religion that it's a natural form of ubiquity? Okay, I don't know if it's just the way to try and get the point across. So it's a natural existence of an entity of God that permeates our very existence, our being, our society. There's something inevitable and natural about it, and this leads me to the point that why the propaganda, why the churches, why the clubs, why the denominations? If I just let it go, the natural my natural manifestation will be in the image of God. Why can't that be the? Do you know what I mean? Like, if it is so natural and is so
I
powerful, why
absolutely
can't
know
it?
what you mean. You're expressing it better than I would, and also in a more free and open way than I typically can, given that I have belonged to those clubs. For you and for the audience, when I was full time employed as a minister in a global denomination, which wasn't really a denomination in the exact definition of a denomination, but should be considered a denomination from other perspectives. I resigned from that role at kind of a peak of having achieved not so much from a career perspective, but the ability or a platform from which to pursue certain goals that were important to me, particularly in the family and youth work, youth service space. I was the director of family ministries globally, and I was working to integrate a more family perspective, divide the generation gap that had occurred outside religion and inside religion within our denomination. And I was very excited and enthused by that. But it was at that time, as I had sort of moved up the hierarchy, if you will, that I realized I had to separate my faith from my paycheck. And so, but I am a member of a club because I believe that sort of common ground and understanding of key principles that can occur in religion can provide momentum, coherence, for a group of people to act in concert and in unity. And that can also be a force for good. But yeah, it can be conscriptive or what's the word I'm looking, restrictive, because people can tend to view things as to whether you're in or out. And even a religion that decries othering, right, and believes that othering is a core negative approach that has no positive benefits, still can tend to view the world in a, us and them lens because of that membership. And I think that's probably kind of what you're getting at, and also why you're free in expressing it, because you've declared independence from any such label.
Well, I would almost say it's like a priori, so for anybody listening, it's kind of prior to the senses or any rational sort of. I think it's maybe a returning to or a homecoming to say, I don't even feel the need to think that there is a need for it. I just act naturally, right? And so,
Yes.
but let me play something on the hubris at play here. So I have a site, I have a membership site, and in a way, it's a club, right? And so what if I were to take the position and say, well, I actually don't need any other clubs, and if I were to align myself with the one true club, then there wouldn't be a need to go through so much turmoil to try and start my own club, because I'd be relinquishing to, I guess the structure and staying away from the temptation of trying to create something that's bigger than myself. Like maybe there's some wisdom in that. Ambition is kind of like maybe I shouldn't be so ambitious. Maybe I should just relinquish and find the grace and the glory and happiness, the eudaimonia within a. There's plenty of religious outlets, within my community. I could, just be open and discover them. Maybe I should just. It's time to shut her down, right? Like, would you recommend that? Like,
Well, I think all of us. My mind goes into strange places. So I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking about the human body being a collection, a coherence of energy that manifests itself in the form of a physical body, but in its parts, it's just energy that has somehow coagulated, for lack of a better term right now, into atoms and molecules and matter, and there's water, and there's other kinds of proteins and solids, and there's skin, and there's hair, and all these aggregations, right, come from, at some level, at the biological level, then you have a single cell organism. And then within your digestive tract, you have an ecosystem, an entire universe of particles that, through their activity, independent of you, they are procreating, they are eating, they are pooping inside your digestive tract, and that creates your second immune system, right? Which is the probiotic environment within your digestive tract, which is the result of an entirely different species living inside you, which you need. You need that colony to survive, to have health. So we are this collection, this body, but I am one body. I'm not your body. And it's only at death that hold that you might say my ego has on that collection of stuff and energy, at death, that's when it all becomes one, and I rejoin the universe, right? It goes back to that Joni Mitchell song about Woodstock, right? We are stardust, and we literally are stardust, but somehow something has controlled and occupied and controlled all this stuff and all these systems and all these creatures that are part of me, and somehow, which science can't even explain at all yet, I managed to retain all that, and I am a functioning body that manages all that, all those assets, you will. And it's only when I die that I become one with the universe again. So no, I don't believe you should give up plank sip to bring it back home. You're building something that has value as an independent instance that has to have some form of aggregation, which is controlled by your creative vision in order to accomplish some purpose which you envision, which you in your creative will believe will be a contribution to society. At some massive macro level, that's just what I believe a religion is. God sends a manifestation of himself to provide the impetus for this new collection and aggregation of people. Ultimately, first it's ideas, inspiration, and then it's people who become adherents, and a civilization is born out of that global religion. And that civilization makes a contribution for a while, and then it has its springtime, it has its summer, it has its fall, and it has its winter, and then it decomposes, and the requisite parts become something else. Just like every spring, the plants. So incredibly complex. And I don't know if that contributes to your question about, plank sip, or something about publishing.
Yeah, I was being a little playful with it, but I mean, I think it's a part of responsibility to try and, evaluate yourself, look at yourself from an objective standpoint, look at what projects you're involved with, in the same way that you did with your religious leadership, right? You decided at a point there was a point that you decided, well, that's not what I want to do, and I would maintain that was actually, if you're properly grounded and centered, and have a good relationship with God, then you're going to you're going to choose wisely, and
and the reason was the denomination that I was a part of split right down the middle, pretty much 50-50. And in my book, The People of the Sign, I describe it as the kidnapping and divorce that I had experienced as a child, but now I was an adult and I was forced to choose between mom and dad, and I didn't want to choose either of them. And the sad thing is, when I resigned, I didn't join the other side right away. Ultimately, I did, join the other side because I wanted to go somewhere, but I specifically didn't join. I didn't resign because I was joining. I resigned to resign. And then I decided to go with the other side that wasn't paying a paycheck, and I was then at what was called a lay pastor, right? I continued serving as a minister, but not with a paycheck. And ultimately, I ended up leaving that group as well. But the point is, nobody really would talk to me once I left.
Oh, you were
You know what I
ousted.
I was not ousted. I politely and gently left under very good,
Right.
very good terms,
Oh, okay.
very positively with good friendships. But they still didn't want anything to do because you were no longer a true believer.
But that wasn't the case, though, right? I mean, but it wasn't that.
By certain litmus tests, yes, it was the case because there were
Was the case,
certain doctrines that I disagreed with. But what I was coming to realize is they were meaningless, right? If I say that I have this conception of God, and you say you have that conception of God, and they somehow differ, right? It's that old story about the leg of the elephant versus the trunk of the elephant and the blind men that are seeing different parts of the elephant because God is so far above us it's incomprehensible, right? So whatever I claim to believe or understand about God is meaningless compared to what you claim to believe and understand about God. There's no reason for any disunity. And yet litmus tests are created just to determine this in or out kind of thing. And this, before we keep chewing up too much time here, I want to segue into the chosen topic tonight, and here's how I'm going to crash land this plane right now. When we were talking about the aggregation of how I somehow control, all these cells, billions, trillions, whatever, how many cells I have, and I'm a body, and how religion can be an impetus to the formation of a civilization. So it is with the United States, in that certain people formed a constitution and declared a unique entity from Great Britain and a different, government structure. And that document or that set of documents formed what was called the Constitution. And that Constitution has become, you might say, the organizing principle around what has now become 50 states and a federal government and state governments and local governments and municipalities and everything that goes on within this entity known as the United States of America. And again, for our audience, full disclosure, I'm speaking to Ferner here. Daniel is from Canada. And so he's detached and objective from this topic that we're about to raise to a degree anyway, more so than me as an American citizen, though I was also born in Canada. But my point is that that Constitution forms the basis of the agreement of the peoples that are citizens and under the jurisdiction and the authority and the legal, authority of this government, right? So we're going to dive into this recent court decision and how different components of American society have discussed and or reacted to the Supreme Court decision to declare the Roe v. Wade decision to be unconstitutional, which is essentially what they did. The Supreme Court of the United States of America has one purpose only, and that is to determine whether or not a given law is constitutional or not. At its highest level, that is the purpose of the Supreme Court of America. Cases go up to the Supreme Court as they're being discussed at lesser courts, and when there's a question of validity based on constitutionality, that's when the Supreme Court will decide to hear it. And what the Supreme Court decided, now this is me talking, my interpretation, if you will, but you can go do your own math on it. My interpretation of what the Supreme Court did is to say that despite what Roe v. Wade did, there is no constitutional basis for declaring that a woman has a federal right to an abortion, which is enshrined in the Constitution. They did not say that a woman should or should not have an abortion, or that it should or should not be legal or illegal. They made no ruling on should, other than to say, we do not find the right to freedom to have an abortion enshrined in the Constitution, the way, for example, we find the right to freedom of speech. American citizens have the right enshrined in the federal Constitution to freedom of speech. But no, sorry, according to the Constitution, the Supreme Court said, women do not have the right enshrined within the federal Constitution to have an abortion, to obtain an abortion. And so it's now sent back to the states. Again, they didn't say you could or couldn't, should or shouldn't. It's up to the states. And now the states will have to create laws or not create laws around abortion. And when those laws are created, then to the degree that there's a case which warrants judicial review, it can get bubbled back up to the Supreme Court. If somebody wants to have an abortion or wants to stop somebody from having abortion or whatever it is that's going on legally, it can get back to the Supreme Court level, and then they can make a decision on the laws that the states come up with. And we can be sure of one thing, we can be sure there will be many laws made that will now start bubbling up, and the Supreme Court will have to decide which ones they review and which ones they don't review. Now, that's just, again, backdrop. I don't know, Daniel, if you have an opinion or want to add or detract anything from what I just said. What we're going to get into now is an article which was published by the Dispatch under something called the French Press. This was forwarded to me by a friend. I haven't fully researched the source and credentials of the source and the article, but the article, and I'll share it here, has the title, "There is a secular case for life." There is a secular case for life. And what that means is that, oops, I do this all the time. There are multiple ways to share, and I have to figure out which one I want to do. So, you don't have to be a Christian, it says here, to oppose abortion. Now, again, I'm not here to be pro or against abortion. But what does concern me is the divisive nature of the discussion. The fact that it is difficult in our nation for people to discuss this matter. Why? Because essentially the Supreme Court has said we're not going to decide. The people now have to decide. It has been remanded back to the people of America. And we can participate in our government. We can participate in discussions. We can contact our representatives. We can work within our states to try to improve the quality of life in any number of ways. But in order to do so, we can't be constantly fighting with each other. We have to be able to sit down and consult and share our perspectives and share our opinions in such a manner that people can understand how the other side views it. Even the idea that, we have a lot of males ruling on this, if we're not talking to the women, then what right do we even have to say anything about this? And I'm not trying to say one way or another anything about this other than that we as a people need to be able to talk about this. And one of the reasons this is difficult on this topic is what's implied by this statement. You don't have to be a Christian to oppose abortion. And I'll scroll down here to this primary statement here, and I'll go ahead and read it because it's a little bit small on the screen. Maybe I can see a way. Yeah, here we go. Lo and behold, technology, and I did figure out how to make it a little bit more legible. There we go. Ever since the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, I've seen a number of people argue that Dobbs is essentially theocratic. That is, that it's the result of a Christian majority of judges imposing their religious beliefs on a religiously diverse country. To these critics, arguments against abortion are inherently and inescapably religious, which makes laws curtailing abortion a form of state establishment of religion that violates the religious liberty of dissenting Americans. And further, the article states, I respect Matthew Iglesias and enjoyed his book 1 Billion Americans, so it's worth responding to this assertion, which kicked up an online stir last week. Abortion policy is the most fun issue to debate on Twitter because one side is motivated by religious considerations, and yet the people who hold that view have all been trained to deny that's the case, as if at any minute they might be pressed into arguing a Supreme Court case. In other words, the people that are motivated by religious considerations have to pretend they're not, because they don't want this to have to come up in a Supreme Court decision and be called out as a hypocrite or somebody who's not thinking logically or whatever. So the article goes on to provide a non-religious basis in support of what many religionists state, which is that abortion should be, if not fully outlawed, at least much, much harder to obtain. So Daniel, your thoughts on this at this point, and because I've been holding forth here a little bit on the backdrop and the background and teeing up this discussion. Interested to hear what you have to say about it.
Well, I have to kind of take a step back on the abortion, I guess, topic, because I'm 46 years old, and I've already got my family, and so I'm really removed from that kind of a decision, I suppose, I guess, if you want to. But if and it's not something that occupies my mind very often, actually. But if you had to, if I had a gun pointed to my head and it said, make a decision now, then I would probably fall in line with the words that it's a woman's choice. Okay, so we'd have a certain side of people that would clap and say, yeah, see, I told you, right? This type of thing.
Well, and again, the Supreme Court isn't saying that it's not.
That's the point.
Right.
But I also want to say that as a philosopher, I'm very respectful of the laws of the land, right? In that way, maybe I have sympathies as like a social, with the social contract theorists, right? Of Locke and Hobbes and all the theories that when we put something together in a land, that we obey those laws from the land, right? And so one of the questions I had thought is, as a constitutional lawyer, of which I know one, and I might ask him, he's from Europe, and I might even ask him, I might say, is there a difference between the constitutional validity of abortion in America versus the constitutional validity of abortion in, say, Germany, right? How do the two countries reconcile that, right? Because an inalienable right, or it's my right to have an abortion, this is what the Supreme Court of the United States has basically denied, to say that no, that's unfortunately that is not your right to have an abortion under a constitutional framework, under the American Constitution. And so that's very interesting. I'm just curious about other countries and how other countries would approach that.
Well, I think, and I'm not remotely a constitutional lawyer, but I have spent actually many years now working closely with lawyers on a daily basis. Not at this level, but contract law, that kind of thing. And so I know enough about the principles, and I've had discussions with some people who really do know what they're talking about. That a constitutional lawyer in Germany would be required to be addressing the German Constitution, not the American. So it's very much subordinate. That's not the right word. It's very much detached from any kind of natural or divine law.
Right.
It's a specific construct, right, which is then being discussed and debated.
And that makes the case to separate religion, where we're actually assuming that it's a religious argument, when in fact we're actually, and the point of the article is exactly the opposite. It's not a religious argument.
Well, and what I think the point the article is making here is that it's very easy for some to completely disenfranchise religious people. You might be aware that in a recent Supreme Court nomination hearing, where they were seeking to confirm, the question came up: does this person have religious beliefs that would disqualify them? Right? By virtue of declaring that you have religious beliefs, does that disqualify you to even be on the Supreme Court? There were those who were pushing in that direction. And so, again, the point of the article is then to say religionists want to deny that their opinion might be influenced by their religion.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, Wade. You have to admit. I mean, the atheists on the other side of the coin are going to say you still do not have an American president that will outright come out and say that he's atheist. He won't get it. He will not get elected.
Right.
And so what is if, in the land of freedom of thought and expression and freedom of religion? Why is it that if you're an atheist and you don't believe in God, there's an automatic disqualification. It works both ways, right?
Well, it does, but I think what I would say, and this is my understanding of the American Constitution and its framers and shapers, and I've mentioned this point before, that the American Constitution was not intended to create a society free from religion, but rather one in which a plurality of religious thought and ideas could exist, so that freedom of religion does not mean freedom from religion, and that there is a fear, warranted or unwarranted. And that's part of the reason for this show, right, is to work towards removing that fear, that those who claim to not have a religion are somehow more sus, as my son would say, suspect. And that's the point of this article, right? Is that increasingly there's this large element that views religious people as suspect, in the same way that religious people view non-religious as suspect. And isn't it always about that power and control? And so in a democracy, it's the minority that's concerned, right? And there's this term white fragility, which I'm not going to get into that topic, but is there religious fragility now in America, right? Because religious people are so afraid that they will become a minority, and certainly their unique religious perspective, right, whatever denomination they belong to, is now a minority belief, because there's no majority religion. I mean, you could say it's Christian, but the Christian faith in America and in the world has broadened to encompass so many very different perspectives that it's hardly more, if that makes sense.
I don't know about that. Like, I mean, if you look at the culture in general, I think it's got a very strong Christian ethic
I
to
completely agree. What I'm getting at is in the culture war issues within America, you have many, many, many Christians who are on the side of the, let's call them secular humanists or atheistic religious people. I belong to something called the Multi-Faith Clergy Council. Well, it's changed. It's the Multi-Faith Coalition of South Central Wisconsin. For a variety of reasons, and I don't want to get into it too much, but there's you might say that in the Madison area, those people are definitely not on the conservative side of most issues, while they are representing a Christian perspective and also Jewish and other faiths that belong to that coalition, Muslim. But most of them are united in their very liberal, and I don't mean that politically, but I don't know how else to describe it, progressive, liberal, whatever, perspectives, which are, on the opposite side of all these issues from conservative, evangelical, mainstream, formerly known as mainstream. You follow me? That's what I mean. Certainly Christian is the dominant religion, and therefore Jesus, versus Muhammad or Moses are held up and honored and revered, as the highest expression of religious, whatever. But on these issues of religion in society and the social issues and the decisions that are being made, there's a plurality, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's fair enough. Yeah, I can align with that. I think that's a fair description.
So let me quickly scroll down now and read the. Well, hang on one second here. Let me just share this. This may be a little bit hard to follow if we go through it quickly, but nonetheless, we're going to have to. So let me just jump back into this article here. So after that tweet by Matthew, who says religious people are motivated on this topic by the religion, but they have to deny that they are, or they want to deny that they are. Matthew then goes on to say this, responding to Andrew Egger, was a very compelling post up until the last part where he pretends there are compelling secular reasons. Andrew Egger said, "Nothing is sillier than the intellectual ghettoization of religious considerations," which is what I was just referring to, right? When religion is so relegated to outside the mainstream that it's ridiculed and spat upon intellectually, right? The ghettoization of religious considerations. No, they're foundational first principles. Of course, they're going to influence the way you see most things. Pro-lifers don't deny this. They just argue there are compelling secular arguments too. So Matthew says he pretends there are compelling secular reasons, and then in his article it says Matthew is wrong. I'll quote Hentoff. "Once the sperm and the egg meet, they find a sort of nesting place." And by the way, I believe he's quoting Hentoff, who is an atheist, who declared his basis for being pro-life independent of religion. And this is one of the things he said. "Once the sperm and the egg meet and they find a sort of nesting place in the uterus, you now have a developing human being. It's not a kangaroo, it's not a giraffe, it's a human being. And that development in the womb until the person comes out is a continuing process. Therefore, if you kill it at any stage, first 3 weeks, first 3 months, you're killing a developing human being. Nat's statement isn't an assertion of religious dogma, but of scientific reality. An unborn child has its own separate DNA. It isn't a tumor or other form of growth that is an extension of the mother. It's utterly dependent on its mom to live, no question, but it is a separate human life." And this plays into the discussion as to why the Supreme Court might be less interested in making a ruling on this as an inalienable right, and rather relegating it to the states, where a little bit more attention needs to be paid to exactly what's going on under differing circumstances, such that the Supreme Court can weigh in more specifically on how this topic is or is not being handled. But to create this blanket federal statement that has the net effect of encouraging the erasing of this kind of perspective, right? Which is not necessarily a religious perspective at all. Not necessarily a religious perspective at all. Now, a religious perspective might add to this in terms of what is a human being. Is a human being created in the image of God or not, right? The topic of this show. But it's not a fundamentally religious discussion. It's a scientific discussion to say, look, that's an independent, separate life that has the potential of existing completely separately from the mother, that happens to be hosted by the mother at that time, and therefore it's a little bit more complex than, you know, some other kind of medical procedure. I'll stop there, Daniel, and let you respond and react to some of this.
I was in a debate with somebody, I think a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, pro life or like for and against abortion, pro choice, pro life, and I was taking the position of pro choice, and a fellow, I don't even think he was religious, took a position of pro life, and so that's why I bring this up. And I actually had a hard time debating him. He was a good debater, actually. And I guess, there's a lot of emotion on the side of pro choice, and probably rightfully so, right? However, the issue that I couldn't really argue very well was the definition point of when the fetus becomes something that has to be protected under the law or recognized as a human being, right? And there's ambiguity there, because the question comes into play about when the human being can actually sense and feel pain, right? And so or be cognitively aware, or somehow suffer as a result of that abortive process, right? And it did feel like it was kind of a gray area. I mean, there's the moment of conception, which is, once that DNA forms, that seems to be something more scientifically valid and recognizable as actual, with modern means of I guess, like scientific knowledge of biology, right? Of which we didn't have 1,000 years ago, but we do have that now. So we do know what conception is, and where the fetus and how the fetus is developing, and at what stage it's developing, and this type of thing. So I think an argument can be actually made for, like this article does, about a scientific basis rather than a solely religious claim on abortion versus pro-choice. Would that be fair to say?
Well, absolutely, and from a religious perspective, and as a student of the Bible, and I would welcome hearing from any of our listeners, whether Jewish or Christian in particular. I'm not aware of the Bible addressing abortion anywhere. It is silent, in my opinion, on the issue of abortion. It does talk about the unborn child, and it says that God knew you, in several cases, when you were in the womb, which again lends credence to this kind of discussion that we just saw from a non-religious person. But in terms of legislating what should or shouldn't be done, well, that's a matter of interpretation. And I believe that many interpret from the law, thou shalt not kill, right? But then there are cases where the mother's life is threatened by the new life growing within her, right? And, the mother's life is at risk should this pregnancy be allowed to continue. Now, when I resigned from the ministry, one other component, aside from not wanting my paycheck, to be determined by my faith or vice versa, I also didn't really enjoy being the one that all the members came to and asked me all these questions about what they should do in their lives. And my answer was always, to invite them to read the Bible for answers and to pray about it, to seek a direct answer from God. And I could point them to certain passages of Scripture which might inform their decision. But to the degree that many of them wanted me to make decisions for them, which they often did, frankly, I hated that. I am not the kind of person who wants to go around telling other people what to do with their lives. That's just not really in my nature. And so I didn't like that part of being a minister at all. And nor do I have any interest in telling women what they should or shouldn't do on this issue. my approach is simply to enable conversation and to invite us to explore what the writings say independently of whatever dogma or creed you may have adopted without critically examining it, no matter what religion you belong to. Because it's my view that every religion becomes corrupt over time, that there is a divine source of revelation, that God sends a manifestation to this planet, to people, whether it be Moses, Noah, Jesus, Adam, Abraham, and so on, with a message that comes from God, but that message becomes garbled in the transmission often, and certainly over time the application of it becomes corrupted through the growth and development of a religion with its priesthood, with its laws, with its traditions. And so encouraging people to go to the source and to seek answers directly from that source in light of the writings that exists. I'd much rather do that than trying to tell people what the decision should be. That's another reason I would never want to be a judge, But we do have judges, and it is their responsibility to determine what the law states or doesn't state.
Yeah. So, wait, I wanted to ask it, like, I think there's a missing part of this. You bring up a point of religions can over time become corrupt, and maybe they need a reset, or they need to fundamentally go back to first principles. You could say that cultures also go through this kind of a cycle, and from
Indeed.
a philosophical standpoint, it's you're getting into a little bit of the cycles of Hegel, the way things kind of move in a cyclical nature through history and time. But my point is really to, and I'm going to do something a little abstract here, okay? I think it was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was an emergence of a kind of a class, right? And this would be a children class, a boys and girls class, right? It became to solidify a little bit. So they were no longer young men in training to do what their father or their mothers did. They actually became youth, right? They became youth. And with that definition, or the zeitgeist, the dominating culture that went through culture, went through the society, there's certain things that kind of just emerged as a phenomenon, right? And so where I'm going with this is that we live in a society where we don't marry immediately. And I could say for the most part, okay. Now, your family may operate a little bit differently. Your children may grow to a certain age and enter in some sort of a matrimonial arrangement with, with their husbands, or I know you have daughters. That's why I guess I can't help but say
I have one of each.
Oh, one of each. Okay, so they find their partners, right? And they form those relationships, and there's nothing that happens out of wedlock, right? And as a father, you're like, yes, damn right, there's not going to be, right? But I'm just joking. That might be the traditional approach. But
nothing is a big word, but certainly certain things are absolutely reserved for marriage in my religious belief. Yep.
Right. But what I'm saying is I'm just trying to observe. I'm just trying to observe that the society that we live in, it doesn't typically happen that way.
Right.
You go to college, you experiment, you have different partners, healthy, functioning relationships, and as you get into that danger zone, right? Then something may happen and emerge, and you're not engaging in those relationships thinking that person who is in such and such a frat house, just to say we're talking about college at this particular time,
Right.
You may really love that person, but that's not the person that you want to build your whole relationship, your whole life. You don't want to, that is not what you put into that relationship, right? And I think that now adding that back, or returning that back to a woman to say, wait, think about that. really changes the dominating culture. And I think if I'm really thinking about what the pushback is that, and I guess I am trying to speak for women. I'm being presumptuous here, but it's like if they really psychologically look at it, they go, wait, that's really heavy. That's really heavy for me to, come to a relationship with.
Right. And I was thinking as you went along before you even brought it to that fine point at the end that, yeah, Daniel, you're addressing exactly what the issue really is. And it is this: whatever social contract we establish, right? And going back to the Constitution and the subsequent laws that are formed, they do end up determining what the culture is like to a degree. And when those foundational agreements change, you get a different culture, right? You put in different elements into the petri dish, and a different culture emerges at a much more complex level. Yes, the change does end up immediately or slowly modifying the culture that results. The laws that you establish do, in fact, determine behavior and outcomes, right? Certain things that used to be criminal are no longer criminal, right? And yes, certain decisions, may or may not be made. And in American society, like to go on a whole nother point, the decriminalization of marijuana, for example, part of the reason for that is that so many young lives were not only debatable as to whether they were or were not being harmed by the drug, but they were certainly being harmed by the stigma of the criminalization of having a criminal record, right? And this was also applied disproportionately against different races. For those who think there's never has been or is no longer such a thing as institutional racism, yeah, it does exist in some forms, because blacks and whites have been treated differently under laws and continue to be to a degree. I'm not going to try to establish to what degree, but the point is, changing the laws does change the culture, and not changing the laws also changes the culture, right? And that is the crux of why people care about this, because they care about the culture. I care about, the environment in which my children are going to grow up. What is or is not declared to be a safe space in schools for certain things happening matters to me as a parent. If I'm sending my children to public school, I do care and am concerned about the culture that they're going to experience there and the influence that culture has on them. And, parents have the right to, not show their children certain films. In our family, the debate was Stranger Things, right? This Netflix phenomenon, Stranger Things, which in season 4, I think it is now, has morphed closer to what would be considered a horror show, whereas in season 1, it was a little bit less so. And I remember back in the day, E.T., the movie E.T., was banned in Sweden for scenes that were dangerous and frightening to children, right? Whereas in America, nobody thought that way. Different cultures viewed how you should or shouldn't protect your children, differently. And it will always be that way. To your point about emerging children in the class of youth and the freedom that came with the American automobile, right? And teens having access to that transportation and that freedom. All of these things do change the culture in which we live, and people care deeply about it. And so it is with this decision. Mm. So yeah, there's a reason why people care and are passionate about it. But again, we have to be able to discuss it.
So not trying to put this in a religious framework, right? I mean, I know, because I'm trying to imagine, say, 300 to 400 years from now. And let's look at the ideal path. Would you say that the ideal path would be that we have children, those children grow up to a certain age, and they do not have extramarital sex, period. They wait until they are married, and they have one partner, And that is the ideal. That's what we as parents help cultivate and help to teach and reinforce and help our society move towards. Would you see that as um, um, like say the last 100 years as a momentary blip of like us returning to a path of I guess like virgin marriage, kind of
So
transitions type of
I
thing.
think I think throughout human history there have been ideals, intent, even proclamations of what one will and will not do. But this, and I love this little phrase, the say do ratio of human beings has always been rather poor, right? In other words, hypocrisy has always been extant in and outside religion. You know, if you don't declare to have religious beliefs and religious intent and morals, you can be less of a hypocrite because you're not claiming any standard. So anything you do is in alignment with what you proclaim because you're proclaiming, a lot of people, I think, feel comfortable proclaiming themselves to be cads, to use an old fashioned term, as guys, because then when they behave that way, they're not hypocritical. Whereas people who proclaim to want to adhere to a standard, they're hypocrites because that standard is unreasonably high often. What's my point here? My point is throughout human history, people have set goals and ideals, often through religion, and then failed to meet them. So I don't believe there was ever a time in society where that was, completely true, or where people were doing it with consciousness, awareness, understanding, and intent versus living empty, meaningless lives, trapped in isolation in unhappy marriages, right? But doing it for the children or doing it for, whatever church they belonged to or whatever social group where it was unacceptable to be a divorced person. You follow me? But but to me, and that is the essential role of religion, is to set that standard and also to indicate that there may even be, when this life ends and whatever I am dissolves and becomes one with the universe, part of what I am will continue. It's typically called the soul in religion.
Oh, I
And
was
that
going to ask
what
if it was on YouTube. Sorry.
yeah, I then will carry some version of what I created in this life, created in the image of God, and whatever I am, which will grow and develop through the choices that I make and the decisions that I make and the lives that I influence and the influence that other lives have on me. I'll carry that forward in some sense. So my thought about judgment, my thought about of obedience to some standard may, and this is a religious perspective, may be more intense, may have more teeth in it than somebody who doesn't have that belief, right?
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah, you're describing something like, the everlasting life of um, what Wade represents and leaves in his wake as a result of his time on this earth. Really. Um, but even prior to
Which gets back to the one aspect I think that is inherently religious, because the soul is not a scientific concept, and most people like this Nate here, who was declaring a scientific, atheistic, if you will, basis for being pro-life, it wouldn't necessarily extend to the point where that growing, developing human being also has a soul, also has some purpose beyond this life, beyond this existence. That's just another element, which again maybe does indicate that some religious people, absolutely do feel strongly about it, independently of scientific basis for it.
That's interesting. I want to ask your opinion about the the need or the encouragement from a, let's just use Christianity as an example, but I think it's actually in most religions they encourage more population. Okay, fair enough. Would you say? Would you? No. Would you? But
I'm
would
sorry,
you
I'm just laughing because I'm thinking of a scene from Monty Python, Meaning of Life. I don't know if you've ever seen it. That song, "Every sperm is sacred," right?
Yeah.
So I think that is often, well, it's in the Bible for sure. It's in the opening verses. As I've often said, the second commandment, I used to say the first, it's actually the second. First commandment is dress and keep the garden. The second commandment is be fruitful and multiply, right?
Right.
And I think there is a divine desire to see life. When you look out in springtime, there's a natural proclivity for this explosion of life. And we drove through these cornfields, and I was kind of figuring how many ears are on an ear of corn, right? And each ear of corn, brings 200 corn stalks for the next year for the farmers who harvest that one ear of corn, and it brings forth 200-fold, as it says in the Bible. And I think there is that element just in life generally. And that actually is also kind of one of the big culture war issues right now, is where people want to see less people on this planet. There's the belief that this planet is won't or can't sustain, and some people will look to extraterrestrial opportunities for humankind to expand, in some science fiction kind of way. And one of the key issues is, how do we organize life on this planet more equitably so it can sustain a larger population? There are probably many different views about what should or shouldn't be done in that regard, and again, a lot of discussion needs to be had about that before, some powerful leaders foist this or that solution on people. Right, we're off into other topics now, and I don't know if I'm remotely answering your question.
Well, I think it's really relevant, because I think if we're trying to get down to I know I'm focusing more on religion, and the religious reasons or wisdom behind being fruitful and multiplying. I don't want to really.
Well, let me throw something out there again in terms of religion, and this is not to, specifically point fingers at any one religion, but I personally, again, do not see in the Bible any valid reference against birth control, right? Which is why I kind of laughed at that Monty Python thing. I find nothing in the Bible that prohibits birth control. I do find indications, and I believe from my from sources outside the Bible, which I won't get into here, that in fact abortion should not be used as a contraceptive, right? But contraception to prevent a pregnancy, I don't understand why that would ever be pointed. Why a religion would have such a view, personally, because I don't see it in the Bible, Old or New Testament. I know there are some verses where, that might have been quoted. I don't believe they remotely indicate that is appropriate, right?
Mm. Yeah,
So,
I like the way you've pulled that back in. Stay away from population, but that's really interesting about, how you frame that. I think. Because you are a man of faith, you're a man of religion, even if it's an independent. But the idea that
well, I'm not an independent, but I do believe in the independent investigation of truth. Everything
Right.
should be looked at critically with your full awareness, and you should test. God in the Bible says, "Prove me now herewith." And so you should put these things to the test. You shouldn't just credulously swallow it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's I think you're focusing on wisdom, which as a philosopher, I can applaud you for that. Do tell more, Wade.
Well, I also believe, Jesus said, where two or three of you are gathered together in my name, I will be there among you. And he also said, where two or three of you agree. So there has to be discussion, and an agreement has to be reached. I do believe in childlike faith, which means you should be positive and optimistic, and believe that the answers are out there, and that when you knock and you ask, the answer will be given. But you shouldn't have childish or blind faith, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's really
Because
interesting.
that's really superstition and just again, abdicating your sovereignty, which was given to us at creation when God said that He created us in His image.
Yeah, I really like how you bring it back to the conversation, and it makes me think of Sam Harris, actually. As a very
I enjoyed reading him, though I completely disagree with many of his conclusions.
Yeah, probably right. But he says these conversations are really important, and if we lose the ability to have conversations, then I think we lose this ability to have that emergent phenomenon take place in form right in front of us, right? And so I think it's not just about the process of what I think and how I platonically form an ideal. What really happens is how we can interact and exchange and build these things in unison together. I think that's the real important thing.
Yeah, some of my listeners will love that I'm about to quote this quote, which is, "Only in the clash of differing opinions can the shining spark of truth emerge." And I believe that's true. If we are not actively engaged with our mind, and if we, look, God created us with the ability to act independently, right? He gave us freedom of choice. And He gave each of us the kind of independence that allows us to stand somewhere else and view it from a different perspective, which is literally what perspective means, right? You're looking at it from a different angle, and you have a different perspective. And as a result of those gifts of freedom of choice and a unique perspective, which is there's some individualized component in each of us that is different and unique, like every snowflake is unique, right? And on it goes. We have a unique perspective. Each and every one of us has a unique perspective. And to the degree that our experiences are different, it could be very different. And all of those perspectives are important because none of us has remotely even a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what God has conceived. And I use that pun intended, right? What God has conceived, right? He has conceived us. And whatever we can conceive is different, is a different angle, a different slice. You think of a diamond that has 64 facets. Well, it's infinite, the number of facets. And if we are actually following God's guidance, then He's giving us some unique little spark of a fraction of a gem that we have a responsibility to contribute. He's put something within each of us that we have a responsibility to contribute. And if you're not honing that perspective and, working on it and having the confidence to speak up and share it in the dialogue, because it's needed. It's needed. Your perspective, whoever you are that's listening in, is needed. It's unique and it's different and it's needed in the discussion. And unless that perspective is brought to the discussion, you really shouldn't complain about the outcome, right? And I know sometimes others may want to exclude that perspective. And oftentimes, frankly, anybody who's got a different opinion, it's not wanted. It's not welcome. Trust me, I've experienced that over and over and over in my life. And you have to keep bringing it. You have to bring that perspective, because iron sharpens iron, and only, and I mean it literally, only in the clash of differing opinions can the shining spark of truth emerge. That says if there's not a clash, there's no shining spark emerging.
So how are we clashing? Like, how would
Well,
you describe our clash?
respectfully saying, I disagree on that point. But I'm not remotely talking about, going through the streets and protesting and civil disobedience. That should not be necessary if discussions are taking place in which each person's voice is welcome and encouraged to be heard, right? But I tend to be opinionated and dogmatic, and I know that. It's because I have had almost always, a unique and different perspective, and I had to shout and be insistent to be heard. It felt and it seemed. Over the years, I hope I've developed, a little bit more of a, moderated approach to that, and I've learned that to be respected, I have to be respectful, and to be understood and heard, I have to, carefully consider my words and, really think about them before I speak, in order to hopefully have my idea, get a fair hearing. But still, I'm not afraid to say, well, I disagree, and here's why.
Yeah, I like that. It's reminds me of the nature of judgment, actually.
What do you mean by that, Daniel? Nature of judgment.
How it's really a group process. Really, fairness isn't entirely born from yourself. So I'm trying to not only say that it comes from within, this idea of perspective and bringing something out into civil discourse, but the whole concept and function, the entity, I guess you would call it, of judgment, happens in the dynamic of a group. And I think that's what Plato was either, I don't know if that's what he was actually leading us down or what he actually thought, but it's one of the parts of the Platonic dialogues where he leaves it kind of questionable. It's like I never really get a satisfying answer. Well, what is judgment, right? He asks the question a lot, but it doesn't seem to ever answer it. And I think that it emerges in it emerges in something similar to this and in other group and social dynamics. So, yeah.
Well, and that's why, Daniel, I just love that you're participating in this. I really appreciate the dialogue. I really appreciate the the open sharing of common perspectives that nonetheless are coming from a different place, right? So if two people are approaching the same light source from different directions, one is traveling west and the other is traveling east, and neither one should be telling the other, you need to turn around and head west, because that's how you get to the light.
Yeah, I guess.
And with that, maybe we'll call it a wrap for today, unless you have any final points or thoughts of wisdom, Daniel.
That's a good way to summarize it, Wade. I'm looking forward to next week.
Awesome. And thank you to the audience. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll have another interesting show for you next week.